He received a voice message from a friend who died 3 years ago. The recording contained his frightened voice. "They found me. You're next." I couldn't pull myself together for a long time. The phone lay in my hand, and Daniel's voice echoed in my earbuds. The same Daniel who had died 3 years ago. I played the message again. "They found me. You're next. Don't trust anyone. Not even yourself." The connection cut off. My heart was pounding wildly. I checked the number. Unknown. Anyone could have faked the voice. But the intonations, the manner of speaking, it was him. The message arrived at 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been working late at my desk, reviewing case files, a habit I'd developed after leaving the force to become a private investigator. 3 years of building a new life after Daniel's death, and now this. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, my hands trembling slightly. The amber liquid caught the dim light of my desk lamp as I swirled it in the glass, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Daniel Mercer had been my partner on the force for 6 years. We'd been through everything together: drug busts, homicides, even a corruption case that had made both of us enemies within the department. His death had been ruled a suicide. Found in his apartment with a gunshot wound to the head, service weapon in hand, doors locked from the inside. I never believed it. Daniel wasn't the type. I played the message a third time, my investigator's mind now kicking into gear. The background noise, there was something there. Street sounds. Music. I couldn't quite place it. "They found me. You're next. Don't trust anyone. Not even yourself." I closed my eyes, focusing solely on his voice. There was fear there, yes, but something else too. Urgency, but also, determination. Like he was following a script but trying to tell me something more. 30 minutes and another bourbon later, I was in my car, driving toward the old neighborhood where Daniel and I had once shared an apartment. The streets were nearly empty, rain beginning to fall in a fine mist that made the streetlights blur into halos of orange and yellow. All the while, I tried to convince myself that someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe Rogers from the precinct, he always had a twisted sense of humor. Or perhaps one of the Castillo brothers, recently released from prison. We'd put them away 5 years ago, and they'd sworn revenge. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a prank or a threat. The voice was too perfect, the timing too precise. I pulled up across the street from our old building, a pre-war 4-story brick structure that had seen better days. Most of the windows were dark, as expected at 1 in the morning. That's when my blood ran cold. There was light coming from Daniel's old window on the 3rd floor. The apartment that had remained vacant for 3 years. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, watching. No movement, no shadows passing in front of the blinds. Just steady, yellowish light. My service weapon was at home in my safe. I hadn't carried regularly since going private, but I had a compact Glock in my glove compartment. I checked it, tucked it into my waistband, and stepped out into the drizzle. The lobby smelled the same, a mixture of old carpet, radiator heat, and the faint lingering scent of Mrs. Patel's curry from 1B. The elevator was still out of order, just as it had been 3 years ago. Some things never change. I took the stairs slowly, listening for any sound. The building was quiet except for the distant hum of a television from one of the apartments and the occasional creak of the old structure settling. When I reached the 3rd floor, I paused. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by wall sconces that cast more shadows than light. Daniel's door, 3C, was at the far end. No light spilled from underneath it. I approached cautiously, one hand near my concealed weapon. As I got closer, I noticed something on the worn hallway carpet in front of his door. An envelope. No markings, no name. I glanced up and down the empty hallway before crouching to pick it up. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single photograph. Me. Taken today. Leaving my office building, holding my coffee cup, checking my watch. My skin prickled. I turned around quickly, scanning the hallway behind me. Empty. I tried the doorknob to 3C. Locked, as expected. Pressing my ear to the door, I listened for any movement inside. Nothing. Yet the light I'd seen from the street suggested otherwise. I took out my phone and played the message again, this time with the volume at maximum, listening not to Daniel's words but to everything else. There, behind his voice. Subtle sounds. Footsteps. The creak of a door hinge. And something else, breathing. Not Daniel's. Someone else was there when he recorded this. I increased the volume further, straining to hear, and then, faintly, so faintly I might have imagined it, Daniel's voice again, far from the phone, whispering. I'm still here. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the building's inadequate heating. I stepped back from the door, my mind racing. If Daniel was alive, and that was a massive if, where had he been for 3 years? Why fake his death? And who were they? I needed to think, but not here, not in this hallway where I felt increasingly exposed. I moved quickly to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. As I pushed through the lobby door onto the street, the rain had intensified. I ran to my car, water soaking through my jacket. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat breathing heavily, water dripping from my hair onto the steering wheel. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Another voice message. My thumb hovered over the play button. Did I really want to hear this? Whatever was happening, I was now irrevocably involved. I pressed play. The voice that came through the speaker was my own. You're already too close. Leave while you still can. My blood turned to ice. I had never recorded those words. Never. If Daniel was dead, who then was speaking with his voice? And if that wasn't my voice on this new message, whose was it? I started the car with shaking hands and pulled away from the curb, tires splashing through puddles. In my rearview mirror, I could still see the light in Daniel's window. And now, a silhouette standing there, watching me drive away. Morning came with harsh clarity. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night in a 24-hour diner 3 neighborhoods over, nursing coffee and paranoia in equal measure. The photograph from the envelope lay on the table beside my coffee cup. I'd examined it a dozen times, looking for any clue about when it was taken or by whom. The angle suggested someone across the street, perhaps in a parked car. The timestamp in the corner read 4:37 p.m. yesterday, just hours before the first voice message. The waitress, Doris according to her name tag, refilled my cup without asking. You look like you've seen a ghost, honey, she said, concern etching her weathered face. I managed a smile that felt more like a grimace. Something like that. When she moved away, I took out my phone again. The 2 voice messages were still there, digital evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. I hadn't imagined Daniel's voice or the bizarre recording of my own voice threatening me. I needed help, but who could I trust? Daniel's warning echoed in my mind, don't trust anyone. Not even yourself. There was one person who might help without asking too many questions. Sarah Winters had been the department's tech specialist when I was still on the force. She'd left to start her own cybersecurity firm 2 years ago, and we'd kept in loose contact. I dialed her number. Mark. This is a surprise. Her voice was cautious but friendly. What's up? I need a favor, Sarah. Off the books. A pause. Those are expensive words, Mark. I know. I can pay. Come by the office at noon. Back in trance. I spent the next few hours driving aimlessly around the city, watching for tales, my mind churning through possibilities. None of them made sense. Daniel was dead. I'd identified his body myself, stood at his funeral as they lowered his casket into the ground. If he was alive, it meant a conspiracy of staggering proportions. And if he wasn't alive, the alternatives were even more disturbing. Sarah's office was in a converted warehouse in the tech district. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, scanning for anything suspicious. She met me at the service entrance, looking much the same as when we'd last met: curly red hair, sharp green eyes that missed nothing, casual clothes that somehow still looked professional. "You look like hell, Mark," she said by way of greeting. "Nice to see you too." Her office was a stark contrast to the industrial exterior, all clean lines, modern furniture, and walls of monitors displaying scrolling code and security feeds. "So what's this favor that's got you looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds?" She leaned against her desk, arms crossed. I took out my phone. "I need you to analyze these voice messages. Tell me if they're authentic or manipulated." Her eyebrow arched. "That's it? Who are they from?" "The first is supposedly from Daniel Mercer." Her casual demeanor dropped instantly. "Daniel? Your partner who died 3 years ago?" "Yes." She took the phone from me gingerly, as if it might burn her. "And the second message?" "Supposedly from me. Except I never recorded it." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Deepfakes are getting better every day, Mark. Voice synthesis can fool most people now. That's why I'm here. I need to know for sure." She nodded and connected my phone to one of her computers. Within minutes, she had both audio files extracted and displayed as waveforms on her monitor. "This will take a while," she said, fingers already flying across her keyboard. "I need to run multiple analyses." I paced her office while she worked, stopping occasionally to look out the window at the street below. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, casting everything in a gray light that matched my mood. "Mark," Sarah called after about 40 minutes. "You need to see this." I moved to stand behind her chair. On her screen were 2 waveform patterns, one above the other. "This is the message from Daniel," she said, pointing to the top pattern. "And this is an authentic recording of Daniel's voice from 3 years ago. I pulled it from the NYPD database. The voice patterns are identical." "So it is him," I breathed. "Not necessarily. Modern AI can clone voices with scary accuracy. But there's something else." She clicked to another screen showing a more detailed analysis. The recording wasn't manipulated after it was made. If this isn't really Daniel, then whoever it is sounds exactly like him down to micro-inflections. "What about the second message? The one with my voice?" She switched to a different display. "That one's definitely synthesized. Good quality, but I can spot the artifacts. Someone took samples of your voice and generated this message." I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. "Can you trace where either message came from?" Sarah shook her head. "The number is a temporary VoIP account, paid for with cryptocurrency. Whoever did this knows how to cover their tracks." "What about background noise? Can you isolate anything from the first message?" She nodded and turned back to her keyboard. After some manipulation, she played the enhanced audio. Daniel's voice was filtered out, leaving only the background sounds. Footsteps. A door. And there, barely audible, his whispered words, "I'm still here." "There's something else," Sarah said, adjusting some settings. "Listen." She played it again, and this time I heard it, a faint electronic tone, repeating at regular intervals. "What is that?" I asked. "Not sure. Some kind of signal or alert." She typed rapidly, isolating the sound further. "Wait, I know this. It's a cardiac monitor. The kind used in hospitals or medical facilities." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Can you tell anything else? Where it might have been recorded?" She shook her head. Not from this. But Mark. She turned to face me, concern evident in her expression. What's going on? If someone's using Daniel's voice to mess with you. I don't know yet, I cut her off. But I intend to find out. As I prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed my arm. Be careful, Mark. And. She hesitated. Maybe this isn't about Daniel at all. Maybe it's about what you two were working on before he died. The corruption case. I'd almost forgotten. 3 years ago, Daniel and I had been investigating allegations against Captain Reeves and several other high-ranking officers. We'd found evidence suggesting they were taking payoffs from the Vartian crime family to look the other way on certain operations. A week before we were set to present our findings to Internal Affairs, Daniel was dead. The case died with him. Without his testimony and with key evidence mysteriously disappearing from the evidence locker, there wasn't enough to move forward. I'd left the force soon after, unable to continue working alongside people I suspected of being involved in my partner's death. Thanks, Sarah, I said, my mind already racing with new possibilities. I owe you one. Just don't get yourself killed, she replied. I'd hate to have to explain that to my accountant when I write off this favor. My next stop was the hospital where Daniel had been pronounced dead. Memorial General was a sprawling complex of buildings on the east side of the city. I hadn't been back since that night 3 years ago. I found Dr. Eliza Chen in the pathology department, exactly where she'd been when I knew her. She looked up from her microscope as I entered her lab, recognition dawning slowly on her face. Detective Harrison, she said, removing her glasses. Or is it just Mr. Harrison now? Mark is fine, I replied. I need to ask you about an old case. Her expression grew guarded. I assume you mean your partner. I nodded. She sighed and gestured to a chair across from her desk. It's been 3 years. Why now? I considered how much to tell her. Dr. Chen had always struck me as trustworthy, but Daniel's warning echoed in my mind. Just tying up loose ends, I said. Something never sat right about the whole thing. She studied me for a moment, then shrugged. The file's in storage now. What do you want to know? Was there anything unusual about the body? Anything that didn't make it into the official report? Dr. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Like what? Any signs that it might not have been Daniel? Or that he might not have been completely dead? She let out a short, incredulous laugh. You can't be serious. You identified him yourself. Humor me. She sighed again, more deeply this time. Detective, Mark, your partner had a gunshot wound to the head. There was no ambiguity about his condition. As for identification, dental records confirmed it, along with your visual ID. I leaned forward. What if someone wanted to make it look like Daniel was dead? Is there any way that could be accomplished? Dr. Chen's professional demeanor slipped for a moment, showing genuine concern. Are you all right? Perhaps you should talk to someone about. Just answer the question, please. She folded her hands on her desk. In theory, with enough resources and the right connections, I suppose it's possible to falsify dental records. As for the body. She paused, considering. There are drugs that can significantly reduce heart rate and respiration to nearly undetectable levels, but not for long periods. And they wouldn't help with a gunshot wound. What if the wound wasn't real? What if it was staged somehow? She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. The wound was very real, Mark. I examined it myself. I stood up, frustrated. This line of questioning wasn't getting me anywhere. One last thing, I said. Do you remember if any of Daniel's personal effects went missing? Anything that should have been in evidence but wasn't? Dr. Chen thought for a moment. His phone wasn't among his personal effects. I remember because the detective handling the case, Briggs, I think, came looking for it specifically. Said it wasn't at the scene either. Briggs. He'd been one of Captain Reeves' closest allies on the force. The fact that he'd been looking for Daniel's phone was interesting. I thanked Dr. Chen and left, more confused than when I'd arrived. If Daniel had somehow faked his death, he'd done an incredible job of it. And if he hadn't, if he really was dead, then who had sent that message? As I walked through the hospital's main lobby, my phone vibrated. Another message. This time, it was a text. Unknown number. 3rd floor. East wing. Room 317. I stopped in my tracks, looking around the lobby. Was someone watching me? The message had to refer to this hospital, the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. I made my way to the East Wing elevator, my hand instinctively checking that my gun was still at my waistband. The 3rd floor housed long-term care patients, according to the directory. Room 317 was at the end of a quiet hallway. Unlike the other rooms, which had patient names displayed, the small digital screen beside door 317 was blank. I hesitated outside the door, unsure what to expect. Then, taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The room was dimly lit, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. A hospital bed occupied the center, surrounded by various monitoring equipment. The cardiac monitor beeped steadily, the same tone I'd heard in the background of Daniel's message. And in the bed, connected to tubes and wires, lay a man whose face I recognized all too well. Daniel Mercer. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. A bandage covered part of his head, where the gunshot wound would have been. I approached slowly, afraid he might disappear if I moved too quickly. His face was thinner than I remembered, his skin pale, but it was undeniably him. A chart hung at the foot of the bed. I picked it up with trembling hands. Patient number 317. John Doe. Admitted 3 years ago with severe head trauma. Comatose since admission. No visitors. He hasn't woken once, said a voice from the doorway. I spun around, reaching for my gun. A nurse stood there, watching me with a wary expression. Are you family? I lowered my hand. An old friend. How long have you been caring for him? I rotated to this floor 6 months ago, she said, moving into the room to check one of the machines. But he's been here the whole time. 3 years in limbo. Has anyone else visited him? She shook her head. Not that I know of. Just doctors doing their rounds. She paused, looking at me curiously. How did you find him? He's not in the system under a name, just a patient number. I ignored her question. The head wound, was it a gunshot? That's what I was told. Entry wound but no exit. The bullet's still in there, lodged where they can't safely remove it. She adjusted one of Daniel's 4 bags. The doctors say it's a miracle he's alive at all. A miracle, or something else. If Daniel had been here all this time, in a coma, who had sent that message? Has he had any unusual visitors lately? In the past day or two? The nurse frowned. Not that I've seen. She checked her watch. I need to continue my rounds. Will you be staying long? I nodded, not taking my eyes off Daniel. Press the call button if you need anything, she said before leaving. Once alone with Daniel, I moved closer to the bed, studying his face. It was him, no doubt about it. But if he'd been here, unconscious, for 3 years, he couldn't have sent me that message. I took out my phone and played the recording again. They found me. You're next. Don't trust anyone. Not even yourself. The voice was Daniel's. The cardiac monitor in the background matched the one in this room. But how? I checked the room for cameras or listening devices but found nothing obvious. The window overlooked the hospital parking lot 4 stories below. No way in or out except through the door. Returning to Daniel's side, I noticed something I'd missed before. His right hand, resting on top of the blanket, had a small bandage around the index finger. Recent, by the look of it. I gently lifted his hand. The bandage covered a small puncture mark, like someone had taken blood. Or a DNA sample. The pieces started falling into place. Someone had Daniel's DNA, his voice pattern, and enough technological capability to create a convincing sound-alike. But who? And why now, 3 years later? I was still pondering these questions when my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a message but an incoming call. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. Mark Harrison. The voice was distorted, filtered through some kind of modulator. I see you found your old partner. I moved to the door and checked the hallway. Empty. Who is this? Someone who knows what really happened to Daniel Mercer. And what will happen to you if you don't back off? Back off from what? I don't even know what's going on. A low chuckle came through the phone. 3 years ago, you and Mercer were close to exposing something that would have destroyed some very powerful people. We thought the message was clear when your partner ended up with a bullet in his brain. You tried to kill him, I said, anger rising in my throat. We did kill him, for all intents and purposes. A vegetable in a hospital bed is hardly living. Consider it a mercy that we didn't finish the job. Why contact me now? Why the games with the voice messages? Another chuckle. Let's call it a courtesy warning. We've noticed your renewed interest in certain old cases. The Vartian family, the missing evidence, Captain Reeves' early retirement. I had been looking into these things, quietly, on my own time. Nothing serious, just curiosity and a lingering sense of unfinished business. Walk away, Harrison. Or next time, we won't leave enough of you to put in a hospital bed. The call ended. I stood there, phone in hand, my mind racing. They, whoever they were, had been watching me. They knew I'd been poking around the old case. And now they were warning me off. But something didn't add up. If they wanted to scare me, why the elaborate ruse with Daniel's voice? Why not just threaten me directly from the beginning? And who had sent me to this room? I looked at Daniel's unconscious form one more time. I'll figure this out, I promised him. I'll find who did this to you. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on the medical chart again. Something nagged at me, a detail I'd overlooked. I picked up the chart and flipped through it more carefully. The admission date was exactly 3 years ago. The attending physician was Dr. Ellis, a name I didn't recognize. And the notes indicated a pre-existing condition, early-onset Parkinson's disease. Daniel had never had Parkinson's. I checked the patient ID number again, 317. The same number as the room. And the same digits as the time on the photograph that had been left for me, 317. It couldn't be coincidence. I looked more closely at Daniel. The face was his, yes. But now that I was paying attention to details, other things seemed off. The height was right, but the hands were different, the fingers slightly longer, the knuckles more pronounced. The chart listed the patient's blood type as AB negative. Daniel had been O positive. This wasn't Daniel. But if not him, then who? And where was the real Daniel? My phone vibrated again. Another text from the unknown number. Tick-tock, detective. Some puzzles are better left unsolved. Attached was a photograph of me, standing in this room, taken less than a minute ago. I spun around, scanning every corner of the room. No cameras that I could see. Which meant. I rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty in both directions, but a door at the far end was just closing. I ran toward it, gun drawn. The door led to a stairwell. I could hear footsteps echoing from below, moving fast. I took the stairs 3 at a time, the sound of my own breathing harsh in my ears. At the ground floor, I burst through the door into a busy corridor. Medical staff and visitors looked up in alarm at the sight of my weapon. "Security," someone shouted. I holstered the gun quickly and scanned the crowd. No one running, no one looking suspicious or out of place. Whoever had been watching me was gone. Back in my car, I tried to make sense of what I'd learned. The man in room 317 wasn't Daniel, despite the striking resemblance. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to make me think my partner was alive but comatose. But if that wasn't Daniel, did that mean the real Daniel actually was dead? Or was he alive somewhere, trying to warn me through these cryptic messages? And why use the number 317 repeatedly? What significance did it have? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot, I realized I was no closer to the truth than when I'd received that first voice message. If anything, I was deeper in the mystery, with more questions than answers. My phone vibrated once more. I almost didn't want to look. Another text, same unknown number. "Still looking for ghosts, Harrison. Check your old case files." The answer has always been there. March 17th. March 17th. The date meant something, but what? I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. There was only one place I could go now, back to the beginning. Back to the case that had cost Daniel his life, or freedom, or whatever had actually happened to him. As I drove through the darkening city streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere, someone was following my every move, anticipating my next steps. My phone lay silent on the passenger seat. No more messages. For now. But one question burned in my mind, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. If Daniel was dead, then who was speaking with his voice? And if that wasn't my voice on the second message, whose was it? The night closed in around me, full of shadows and secrets. And somewhere in the darkness, answers waited. I just had to stay alive long enough to find them.